Hi, this is Deena Thomson, author of Fallen Poppies, and this is Chapter 2.
Chapter 2. Puffy white clouds floated across the clear blue sky. It was harvest time, and Jo Beth was out in the field picking corn with the other children. She threw a cob into a sack and wiped the freely flowing sweat from her brow. Her face was a mass of black and blue bruises. After Father James raped her, he whipped her ruthlessly with the belt. Her entire body was covered with welts, and she ached all over. "I have to leave," Jo Beth said under her breath. "I cannot let him come back tomorrow." Visions of the morning filled her mind. She shivered, feeling like she was dipped in an ice pool. The day was sweltering hot, but she felt cold. "No," she said out loud, "I will not think about it." She shook her swollen head back and forth, pressure forming in the front of her skull. The ground swirled before her eyes, and she felt faint. Jo Beth closed her eyes and sat on the ground until the dizziness passed, her fingers raking the gritty dirt beneath her. "Oh, God," she sobbed, clutching her arms. Tears fell uncontrollably as her nails dug into her already bruised skin. Droplets of blood pooled around her fingers, but she did not feel it. "Jo Beth?" A tiny voice broke through her tears. She wiped wet grime away with her fist and looked up into a small, pale, porcelain face. Shauna had lived with the Johnstons since she was 8 months old. Her long platinum blonde hair fell limply on her face. Her steel blue eyes stood out strikingly against her unearthly pale skin. She would have been a beautiful child if she had not been so sickly pale and if dark circles did not shadow her haunted blue eyes. Jo Beth slowly stood up, embarrassed to be caught crying, and dusted her dress off. "Yes, Shauna?" she sniffed, trying to compose herself. She had purposely gone deep into the fields to be away from the other children. The thought of anyone seeing her after what happened with Father James appalled her. Surely they could tell she was defiled. She looked down at the tiny girl. Shauna was so small for 5 years old that it was not easy to see her. "Are you okay?" Shauna questioned and blushed, looking at her scruffy shoes. "Yes," Jo Beth lied. "Yes." "You look like you got it bad," Shauna continued. "What?" Jo Beth uttered too loudly. Her head snapped toward the puny girl. What if Shauna could tell what had happened to her? Did she look soiled now? She indeed felt dirty and polluted. Jo Beth cleared her throat and ignored the images forming in her mind. No one could know what happened in that room. No one. "Sorry." Shauna jumped back, frightened. "Your face," she shuddered. "He must have beaten you badly." Jo Beth's hand fluttered to her swollen face. "I'm all right," she said, feeling guilty. The child was as nervous as a newborn colt. She remembered when one of Pappy's mares had given birth to a chestnut-colored colt. She had gone to pet its damp nose, and it had bolted from her outstretched hand with a comical leap into the air. Shauna reminded Jo Beth of that colt, high-strung and skittish, ready to leap into the air at the slightest movement toward her. It had never occurred to Jo Beth before that maybe the neglect she was experiencing could be happening to the child before her. A sinking sensation crawled up her neck and into her face, tingling her cheeks. "Shauna," Jo Beth said, wiping her nose, "I have to go to the outhouse, so tell them that, if anyone asks where I am. All right?" She had squatted down to the miniature girl's level. Shauna lifted her frail face up to Jo Beth and fought back the tears welling in her enormous eyes. "Please," Jo Beth yelled in her mind, "do not let me think of you. I have to leave. I cannot worry about you." "You know, Mother and Father don't like it when we go to the outhouse during work," Shauna wavered. A drop of salty water formed in the corner of her eye. "I know, but I have to go badly." Jo Beth tried to ignore the tears. She would not feel responsible for a child she hardly knew. During the time Jo Beth had come to live at the home, she had hardly seen Shauna. Only in the fields and the odd times at the dreadful kitchen table. There, Jo Beth and the other children would eat the same watery soup and dry bread every mealtime. Sometimes, if they were lucky, they would be rewarded with a bit of butter and an odd glass of milk from one of the many cows the Johnstons owned. Jo Beth's mouth always watered at the smells of roast beef and other dishes Mother Tomalina prepared for Father James. More than once at the supper table, as she stared at their savory foods and ate her soup, she envisioned ways to snatch a leg of lamb or chicken, but was always too frightened of the ever-watchful Mother Tomalina. Maybe at night, when everyone slept, she would creep up the cellar stairs and steal quietly into the icebox and satisfy the constant hunger that plagued the pit of her stomach. But alas, when evening came and everyone slept, Jo Beth lay trembling under her gray sheets, picturing the old woman patrolling the icebox with its contents of leftovers. Shauna looked up at Jo Beth beseechingly. It struck her that the child never played. This she knew because Shauna was always working. "Look, Shauna, I have to go. I will wet myself and soil my clothes if I don't go. I will be whipped again, and I do not need another beating," Jo Beth pleaded. This was her chance, her only chance to leave. Mother Tomalina would only expect to see Jo Beth once the sun was down. If Jo Beth left now, she would not be missed for hours. This would put plenty of distance between her and the dreaded house. "Okay," Shauna said, head bent low, turning around slowly. Her little frame looked as though it would blow away like the frail dress whipping angrily around her. Faded and worn, her bony structure was visible through the thin material as it struggled to pull away. She took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in her body, and went toward the outhouse, knowing Shauna would be watching. She must not give herself away by going in another direction. She picked up her ratty sweater, half-eaten by moths, and tied it around her scrawny waist. She had become increasingly thin living with the Johnstons, and the sleeves hung limply between her legs, nearly reaching her knees that a couple of hours ago were viciously torn apart to amuse Father James. She closed her eyes tight, erasing the images of the morning, threatening to play themselves out again in her mind. Run. If she ran, she could escape what happened in the dank cellar. Her feet began to move. The sleeves of her sweater twisted between her legs as the sack dragged behind her. She quickly grabbed corn, rhubarb, and other vegetables growing in the field and tossed them into the bag. Her chest heaved painfully from the effort, and her heart beat frantically for what she was about to do. "I can't get caught," Jo Beth sobbed. The memory of Father James' purple snake, as hard as a rock, forcing into her, ripping her, humiliating her, flashed before Jo Beth's eyes. She rubbed away tears streaming down her grubby face with the palm of her hand. "I need a bath. Oh, God, how I need a bath. I have to get his smell off me. How will I ever get his smell off me?" Jo Beth stopped in her tracks, her chest heaving up and down, and clutched her hands to her mouth. "What has happened to me? What has happened to my life?" Things used to be so simple." JoBeth sobbed out loud, her tears streaming freely. She felt her heart would break. "Why did you die, Mama? Pappy? Why? How could you do this to me?" she moaned. A grimy strand of hair went into her wet eyes, and she absently pushed it behind her ear. The wheat in the fields swayed in the wind, making rustling noises, startling her. "What am I doing, standing here like a fool, crying? I have to look out for myself now. There's no one for me anymore. I am alone." She stood up and breathed deeply. The autumn air felt crisp as it went into her lungs, clearing them of the heaviness surrounding her heart. JoBeth felt lightheaded as she looked beyond the rows of wheat. Later, she would reflect on everything. Right now, she needed to get herself far away from the Johnstons. She began to run. JoBeth wrinkled her nose as she reached the rat-infested outhouse. She thought of entering the rotting structure with its cold, splintery seats and decided against it. The smell inside was putrid, and she felt nauseated by the open door's fumes. If she needed to use the lavatories, she would just go outside. At one time in her life, the thought of relieving herself in public was mortifying. But many things had changed since those days. JoBeth never had to worry about being bitten by rats in her old water closet. She and Mama would scrub the privy regularly, dousing it with lye. Using the outdoors as a washroom seemed more civilized than the dangerous, infectious outhouse that stood before her now. "I will never have anything to do with this place again," she said, staring up at the house. She crouched down behind the tall grass. It was not really an appealing house. It slanted to the right. The original house builder, Mother Tomalina's father, had not been very bright and built it in the winter on frozen ground. So every year during spring, the house shifted and sunk down more to the right. Soon it would slip right through to the bottom of the earth, straight to hell, where it belonged. The roof was falling apart and would not be fixed until the cold came and Father James sent one of the young boys up to patch it. Mother Tomalina was sitting in her usual spot at that time of day, rocking in an old stiff rocking chair given to her by one of the villagers. "To rock the waifs in," the elderly-haired woman who had donated the chair had commented. There was never a waif rocked in that chair, or a child who wanted to be held in Mother Tomalina's flabby arms. She always sat like an angel, how she wanted others to see her. But really, she was a demon, smirking and rocking at the passing neighbors, looking quite saintly as she self-righteously perceived herself to be. That kind, elderly woman, the ladies of the town would say while waving at Mother Tomalina as she sat rocking and knitting away. Mother Tomalina would wave back, giving her best sanctified smile, and continue to knit. "It's too bad about her husband, always in town with heathen women," one would say. "Didn't one of those orphaned girls they took in turn to wicked ways?" The other would say. "I hear tell Mr. James takes a real liking to her. What a shame for poor Mrs. Johnston. She works so hard to give those children a real home." They would shake their heads sadly. To think one of the strays she took under her wing would betray her with her own husband. 2 heartbreaks, turning against God and selling herself to the only man known to her as Pa. It is disgraceful. As soon as they were out of sight of the rocking chair, they would shake their heads and carry on their way, forgetting about poor Mrs. Johnston and her wild husband. JoBeth had seen it before in the store when she had been sent to fetch supplies. The whispers passed from one bonneted lady to the other. She saw the distrustful sneers when a lady walked by with her husband, a protective gasp on their man's arm. as though a mere look from JoBeth would cause their husbands to stray. She had always felt confused by their response. She knew she wasn't as tidy as she had been before her parents' death, but Mother Tomalina refused for other people to see the children in her charge, dressed in their usual attire. The older girls had special dresses, and the older boys had shirts and slacks for such trips into town. Only one boy and one girl could ever be seen in town together because there was no other outfit for the rest to wear. JoBeth, once thought of as one of the town's most respected children, was now shunned by the townspeople. Not used to this treatment, she sometimes forgot herself and would start a conversation with a girl around her age, only to have a protective mother herd her daughter away from the ragamuffin child. Her ego bruised, she would be brought back to the reality of where she was. The girl she had once been, the one with a mother and father and a younger brother, was dead. Just like her parents, just like her brother. They might as well have all died together. Had she provoked Father James to do what he had done to her? She shook her head and cleared the impression forming again in her mind, and turned from the sight of Mother Tomalina's portrait of a wronged woman. Her eyes searched the expansive area. She spotted Father James in the barn with Dex, a 10-year-old boy who had just come to live at the Johnstons. JoBeth's heart once more began to pound uncontrollably. Her breath came in quick, sharp thrusts, and she realized she was nearly panting. She looked at Dex and remembered something one of the older boys had once told her. When a boy turned 14, Father James would make him pay for his bed to sleep in and the food he ate. JoBeth had asked if any boy had worked for his bed and measly dinner, and the boy had said he'd be 14 soon, and would be gone before he would pay for poorly flavored water and a bug-ridden bed. JoBeth had laughed. The boy, Nick, was pleasant, and she enjoyed having him to talk to. She had been so lonely since her parents had died. "What about girls, Nick?" JoBeth had asked once in the barn. They had been sent to milk the cow, and she stood behind Nick's bent back as he finished squirting milk into a tin bucket. He stood up and faced JoBeth. She was already 14, so she knew girls did not have to pay for their keep, even though JoBeth felt that her back-breaking work in the fields was payment enough. Nick's expression had become dark, and he had turned away. "Nick," JoBeth asked the dark-haired youth, "what about the girls? Do they pay?" JoBeth did not like the way he clammed up. Nick, a rambunctious youth with a glimmer in his smile, was a boy who seldom kept a word to himself. He turned to JoBeth, his bangs hiding his brown eyes. "They pay, JoBeth. They pay dearly." "What is that supposed to mean?" she responded. Her heart skipped a beat for no apparent reason. She suddenly felt like a trapped rabbit. Did she really want to know what he meant? "They pay with their souls, JoBeth. They all pay with their souls. Leave, before yours is taken too." He turned and scooped up his bucket of milk, not saying a word to her. What he said left her surprised, confused, speechless, and very afraid. Shortly after they talked, Nick disappeared. The day before he left, he asked JoBeth to go with him. She shook her head, afraid. How would she survive out in the world? Now she wished she had left with Nick. Anything would have been better than the ordeal she had endured that morning. Now she would have to go on her own. Maybe she could find Nick. Then she wouldn't be alone. But would Nick want to be with her if he knew what Father James had done? JoBeth rubbed her arms roughly. They ached from her beating and for someone to comfort her and to make everything all right. She was so alone, So terribly alone. Little Shauna's face popped into her mind, small, pale, and so very young. It dawned on Jo Beth that Shauna would be the only girl left once she was gone. She shivered thinking of the small, frail girl. Again, she steadied her head, trying to clear her mind of all thoughts. She could not think about anyone or anything but herself and the urgency of leaving. Jo Beth turned to depart. She had seen enough. There were no second thoughts. She did not want to think about what lay ahead. She just wanted to get as far away as possible. She swung her bag over her shoulder and started to walk swiftly away from the house. She didn't notice the small figure materialize before her until it was too late, and she collided with Shauna. Both girls tumbled to the ground. Dust flew high above them and fell slowly, like a baby's blanket coming to rest on top of the fallen girls. "What are you doing here?" Jo Beth sat up, trying to shake the fear that had jumped up into her throat. The thought that she had been caught would not leave her. She stood up and started dusting herself off with her hands. Shauna mimicked Jo Beth, dusting herself off and copying her movements step by step. She looked up at the older girl, embarrassed, clumsily trying to hide a bulging burlap bag behind her back. The small child knew she had frightened Jo Beth terribly, and she felt awful about this. "Are you leaving?" Shauna whispered as Jo Beth's face drained of blood. This cannot be happening, Jo Beth thought. She glared up at the angry sun that was determined to bake them alive. "Please," Shauna begged with desperation, her hands clasped together in prayer. "Take me too." Jo Beth looked pale beneath her bruised face, but she was listening. Shauna struggled to raise the sack she held behind her back. "I won't be a bother. I got food, so you won't have to share. I don't eat much, so you could have most of my food too. Please take me too. I is begging you." A tear slipped from her bleached blue eyes, and Jo Beth could see something haunted, something she did not want to see. Closing her own weary lids, she tried to block out the little girl's pitiful face. "Shauna, I can't." Jo Beth clenched her teeth. She felt awful, and her lips began to quiver as she pleaded with this child she barely knew. Shauna was trembling, ready to erupt into tears. "Can't you see you would hold me back? They would search for you. They have had you for so long." "No," she whimpered, tears rolling freely down her ashen face. Her little hands went up to rub quickly swelling eyes, and her lips protruded in a pout. "You don't know. I'll grow up and be a big girl and he'll do it to me too when I'm big like you. I can't stay 'cause I'll end up like the other big girls." "What other big girls?" Jo Beth grasped Shauna's arm, ignoring the child's astonished face. Tall grass swayed on either side of them, and she quickly pulled them both into the safety of it. Time was already ticking against her. If anyone saw the two girls standing and talking to one another, it would be all over for them, and Father James would be back to hurt Jo Beth. "What other girls?" Jo Beth implored, unable to stop herself from shaking the child by the shoulders. If there were other girls, what would have happened to them? Jo Beth was suddenly desperate to know. Nick had said girls paid with their souls. Did he mean what Father James had done to her? Had Father James done the same thing to other girls? "The ones who left," Shauna choked, her head shaking back and forth on her shoulders. Jo Beth's eyes were darting frantically in their sockets, causing Shauna to become frightened. Her reaction reminded her of a trapped doe with starving wolves surrounding it, trying in vain to escape to freedom. "They weren't ever found, except that one gal, but she wasn't really found. She just went to town and became... Shauna looked around to see if anyone else was listening. Seeing no one in sight, she cupped her hands to her mouth and whispered, "A whore." Jo Beth pulled back, gasping, and looked at her disapprovingly. Her hand raked through her greasy hair as she absently pulled it away from her tense face. Could the stories be true about the prostitute who had once lived at the Johnston home? Father James' favorite? Is this the girl the town talked about? Their souls. Nick's words echoed in Jo Beth's ear. A cold finger rippled up her spine, and goosebumps began to rise on her arms. She rubbed them harshly with the palm of her hands.
"But the others weren't found. They won't find us either. Mother and Father never search for runaways for long, only for what looks good in town. When the town folks say it's just another ungrateful foundling, Mother and Father stop looking and get another child. It's the truth."
Shauna bent to look at Jo Beth eagerly. "What other girls?" Jo Beth asked sternly, looking beyond Shauna.
"My sister."
Shauna became a grisly white, and the shadows under her eyes darkened. She bowed and stared at her worn shoes. "You have a sister?" Jo Beth was surprised. As far as she knew, they were the only girls at the Johnstons' home.
"I had me a sister. Her name was Donna. Ain't that a pretty name?"
She smiled as she looked up. Jo Beth forced her lips to smile back. The child was beautiful when she smiled, even with her ailing waxen color.
"Yes, it's very pretty. When I have me a baby girl one day, I'm naming her Donna,"
Shauna said in a faraway voice. Jo Beth stood impatiently, waiting for Shauna to continue.
"Donna said our real folks loved us. I don't 'member the folks, 'cause I was just a babe in nappies, but Donna 'membered, that being she was 8 when our folks up and died of the fever. They took Donna and me away. Our folks were scared we'd get it. That's what Donna told me. I wish I had known them,"
Shauna said longingly, picturing parents she never knew.
"We was sent here after they died. First, nothing real bad happened. Just always working lots, like now. But then, Father started doing this thing with Donna, just like he done with Melody, touching her in places he ain't supposed to. Melody said she was running away, and Donna better get me and her out fast before he come after us. I was just 4 and so scared."
A tear started to fall down her white cheek, leaving a dirty trail behind, and her eyes became vacant.
"Donna always said, 'Don't worry, Pun, I'll never let nothing happen to you.' Melody was 14, and Donna was 12 when Melody ran away in the night. Don't know what happened to her. Time passed, and Father kept looking at Donna funny and touching her. Donna kept saying, 'Just a little longer, Pun, and I'll have enough money for us to run away. I don't want us to starve.' I knew where she was getting the money. Stealing from people's pockets in town. Could have had her hands chopped off if they'd caught her."
Jo Beth sighed and placed a grubby hand on her head, wondering where the girl got such an idea.
"Don't think Donna was bad stealing,"
Shauna defended her sister, pointing a chicken bone of a finger at Jo Beth. "I don't, Shauna, I don't. She was just thinking about how you both were going to survive." Jo Beth had not even thought of money. How was she going to survive? A scream started to build in the bottom of her stomach. How was she going to do this?
"One morning,"
Shauna continued, more tears falling down her cheeks,
"he came into our room, wanting more than just touching. Donna told me to hide when he comes bursting into the room. I did, 'cause I always listened to Donna. She was smart and took care of me. Well, he tore her up bad down there, where you pee. She was bleeding all over. I watched the whole thing while peeking from under the bed. He just kept pushing on her. She screamed and screamed, but he don't listen. No one here listens to screams. I wanted to go help her, but Donna looked over at me and shook her head. She whispered for me to stay under the bed. I knew she was afraid he'd come after me next if he knew I was there. So I stayed under the bed and watched.
JoBeth felt sick. Images of Father James on top of her, hurting her. JoBeth clutched her head in her hands and squeezed tightly, holding on for dear life, her dirty hair poking out of her fingers. No, she wouldn't allow it. She couldn't relive it. It was best to forget and never think it happened. Shauna sniffed and rubbed her runny nose with the back of her sleeve, her mind recalling the day her sister had been raped.
When he left, I crawled out from under the bed. Donna was bleeding and crying. She didn't look herself at all. She was all white and her lips were blue. Her teeth kept on chattering together and her body kept jerking. Donna, let's go away from here now, I begged her. I ran to our bed and grabbed the blankets on top. She seemed to be really cold, so I put them over her. She looked up at me all glassy-eyed and told me to be brave and not to be afraid anymore. She told me to get away from here before I got to be a big girl. The money's in the mattress. Take it. Promise me, Donna said, grabbing my hand. I will, Donna. It's our money when we run away, I say to her, crying. Donna's eyes were open, but they seemed really scary looking. Just kept staring at the ceiling. She wouldn't blink or anything. I begged her to stop fooling, but she never moved. I stayed with her a long time till Mother came yelling at us to get to work. She saw me shaking Donna and stopped yelling. She just ran over and put a hand on her chest. Get out of here! Out! She hollered. I didn't know what to do. What's wrong with Donna? I asked her. She's dead, Mother said, as if it were nothing.
JoBeth's throat started to close up. She could not breathe. She knew only too well the pain and loss that Shauna felt.
I said to her, No, Donna ain't dead. She ain't. We're running away from you and Father, so he can't hurt Donna no more. Mother got real angry and grabbed my arm, twisting it till it hurt. You listen to me if you don't want to end up like your whoring sister. Donna had a high fever she couldn't break, and that's what killed her. It was Father's pushing on her that killed her, I yelled. He tore her all up and she couldn't stop bleeding. Mother got so mad, she done slapped me real hard across the face. Those are lies. Mother starts yelling. I ain't never seen Mother so mad before, and I seen her plenty mad. You listen here, you little devil. I'll kill you myself if I hear those foul words from your filthy mouth again. Now get out. I ran out of my room and hid in the barn. When it went night, I figured it would be best I get back to the house before it got too late and I got whipped for being out past the dark time. Donna was gone. I never saw her again. I asked Mother where she was at, and she said she was in hell, where she belonged, and not to worry. I'd be there soon to help shovel a coal for the devil.
Shauna looked up at JoBeth, cheeks all streaked with tears and dirt. A tiny fist rubbed viciously across her little red nose as she sniffled. JoBeth suddenly realized the reason why this little shell of a girl was just that, a shell. The horror Shauna had faced at such a young age had robbed the child of everything. The pain on her babyish face weakened Jo Beth's already broken heart. She ached all over from her brutal rape and the new responsibility of this defeated child before her. She could not leave Shauna. If she did, she would never be able to live with herself. The girl would come with her. How she would care for her, Jo Beth did not know. But if she left Shauna, she would be as dark and monstrous as Father James and Mother Tomalina. She would never be that cruel to anyone. Never. "How will we survive? I have never been on my own," she whispered, staring across the yellow fields. A gust of wind tugged at Jo Beth's flimsy dress, matting her sweaty, sticky hair.
"I still have the money,"
Shauna disclosed softly. Jo Beth bent her head down to Shauna's hopeful face. She continued, seeing Jo Beth's interest.
"I saved it for when I'd run."
She bit her bottom lip, making it paler, and looked at Jo Beth under light eyelashes.
"I even stole some from Father. He thought it was one of the older boys and beat him real bad."
She turned her gaze to her battered shoes shamefully. Jo Beth said nothing. Shauna's lips clasped tightly and stubbornly together.
"I had to. I'm not bad. And I ain't going to hell, neither. I don't give a dickens what Mother says. Donna ain't in hell. She's in heaven with Mama and Papa. And when the Lord calls for me, I guess that's where I'll be headed too."
Jo Beth placed a hand on the little girl's bony shoulder. Shauna tilted her wet face up at the tall, stiff teenager. Shivering, she began to tremble uncontrollably as Jo Beth gazed at her. "You are not bad, Shauna, and no one will ever make you feel that way again," she whispered. "Let's get the hell out of here." Shauna realized her breath and smiled. She didn't realize she'd been holding it.